up on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon. On the second day of his state visit to Korea, Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet with Korean business leaders to seek ways to upgrade economic cooperation between the two nations. Japan's cabinet approves the lifting of some of its sanctions on North Korea in return for Pyongyang's reopening a probe into the fate of Japanese nationals it kidnapped decades ago. Plus, the Dow Jones Industrial Average topped 17,000 for the first time ever following strong U.S. jobs growth. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon on Friday, July 4th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in live from Seoul. I'm Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. On the second day of his state visit to South Korea, Chinese President Xi Jinping spent Friday morning underscoring his country's commitment towards ties with South Korea in meetings with Korean lawmakers and hundreds of students at the very prestigious Seoul National University.
And later this afternoon, Presidents Park and Xi plan to make an appeal to businessmen from both countries at an investors forum. For more on the Chinese leaders' itinerary and details on the two leaders' summit Thursday, we have our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun on the line. You-sun, fill us in.
Jin-joo, Mark, the big event today will be the two countries' Economic and Trade Cooperation Forum, where both leaders will address some 500 Korean and Chinese officials and businessmen. President Park will stress the need to diversify bilateral cooperation from its current focus on the manufacturing sector. She will also propose Seoul and Beijing work together toward realizing her Eurasia initiative of linking energy and logistics infrastructure across the continent. Before the forum, President Park will host China's first couple for a luncheon to further showcase the amicable relationship between Seoul and Beijing. Earlier this morning, President Xi met with Korean lawmakers at the National Assembly as well as hundreds of university students to highlight the importance of expanding channels at all levels and in all areas between the two countries. Just before wrapping up his Seoul visit today, President Xi will meet with Chinese residents in Korea. Guys?
And You-sun, let's talk a little bit about the summit talks that were held on Thursday. During those summit talks, Seoul and Beijing reaffirmed their strategic cooperative partnership and shared their positions on North Korea's nuclear program.
Right. The message from Presidents Park and Xi for North Korea Thursday was certainly a step up from last year's use of the phrase grave threat regarding the North's nuclear program. At a joint press conference, President Park said that she and her Chinese counterpart reaffirmed their opposition to nuclear arms development on the Korean peninsula. Highlighting the now suspended six-party talks, President Xi said the six nations, namely the two Koreas, China, the U.S., Japan, and Russia, should resolve the North Korean nuclear issue through dialogue. The South Korean presidential office said the two leaders also agreed that the right conditions must be met before reviving the dialogue. This reflects Seoul's position that Pyongyang first needs to show its commitment to denuclearize. The Chinese leader also offered a positive assessment of President Park's policy of trust building and expanding humanitarian exchanges with North Korea to lay a foundation for a peaceful reunification. As for Seoul-Beijing ties, the two leaders agreed to take their strategic cooperative partnership to the next level by holding regular political and security meetings and increasing people-to-people exchanges. On the economic front, Presidents Park and Xi agreed to work toward concluding their free trade negotiations by the year's end and to open their currency trade markets to spur bilateral trade and investment. I'm Choi You-sun reporting on President Xi's state visit to Seoul, and I'll be back with an update in our next newscast.
So FTA talks are expected to gain momentum, as our You-sun mentioned, as the leaders of Korea and China agree to accelerate efforts to remove tariffs on each other's products.
Yeah, China is Korea's biggest export market, in fact, while Korea is China's third largest trading partner. Our Song Ji-sun reports on the impact a free trade deal could have on Korea.
Chinese President Xi Jinping, in a joint post-summit press briefing with President Park Geun-hye on Thursday, emphasized their will to wrap up negotiations for a bilateral free trade deal by the end of this year. Delegations from the two sides, who have already held 11 rounds of talks, will try to hammer out their remaining differences later this month. The two leaders expect the free trade deal to increase two-way trade to $300 billion next year, from $230 billion in 2013. With shipments to China accounting for 1/5 of Korea's exports, the Finance Ministry expects Korea's GDP to rise by up to 3% over the next 10 years after the FTA takes effect. Korean automakers will benefit the most as the free trade deal is expected to gradually remove the 22.5% tariff China levies on foreign cars. But Korea's agriculture and fisheries industries could be slammed by an influx of cheap Chinese products, with some exports predicting an annual output fall of some $3 billion. The Korean side wants to exclude as many agricultural products as possible by designating them as extremely sensitive items. Farmers here have urged the government to draw programs to compensate for an expected surge of Chinese products that already take up the lion's share of imported food. If Seoul and Beijing successfully conclude the trade pact, Korea will have established free trade deals with the world's three most influential economic powers: the US, the European Union, and China. 송지선, Arirang News.
And visiting Chinese President Xi Jinping has proposed a joint commemoration with Korea marking the 70th anniversary of two events in 1945, China's victory in the Second Sino-Japanese War and Korea gaining its independence from Japan. China's Foreign Ministry announced Friday that during the Seoul-Beijing summit, President Xi said it was possible Korea and China could hold commemorative events together next year to mark the 70th anniversary of the two milestones. When asked about the proposal, Korea's presidential office spokesperson didn't give a clear answer, saying he could not confirm specific details of the summit. In meetings with world leaders earlier this year, President Xi is known to have emphasized that 2015 marks the 70th anniversary of China's war of resistance against Japan. Now, U.S. specialists in Korean affairs say the South Korea-China summit was a constructive one overall, but were largely critical of the two countries for failing to bring about a groundbreaking deal on the North Korean nuclear issue. Experts, including Victor Cha of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, pointed out that the two countries hold fundamentally different views on the North. Cha said Beijing has made a tactical shift, but it has yet to make a strategic one. Another expert on North Korea, Joel Witt of the 38 North website at Johns Hopkins University, says China may have intended to send a political message to Pyongyang through the summit, but it remains unclear whether Beijing has undertaken any substantive changes on how it handles the communist state. Then how about the reaction out of Tokyo? While the Japanese government remained tight-lipped, media outlets in that country say the Abe administration might be relieved historical issues were not brought up in Seoul and Beijing's joint declaration. Connie Kim reports.
Japan's government had no official word on the recent Korea-China talks.
The Japanese government wants to avoid making comments on the two countries' summit talks.
But its local media seem to find relief that Seoul and Beijing's joint declaration did not mention the historical issues that have been plaguing Tokyo's relations between both countries. Instead, Japanese media were particularly keen on noting that Seoul and Beijing's agreement on the joint research regarding comfort women didn't make it into the televised joint statement, but rather in a supplemental clause. And some Japanese media have interpreted cooperation by South Korea and China on historical issues, such as Beijing's registration of historical records regarding the so-called comfort women with UNESCO, upon the request of the Korean government, as evidence that pressure against Tokyo will heighten following President Xi's visit to Korea. China has seen its relations with Japan sink to their lowest levels in recent years from territorial disputes in the East China Sea over a group of islands. And it's a similar story between Korea and Japan, as President Park lashed out at Tokyo for its review of its landmark apology for wartime sex slavery. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, upon President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul, Beijing has decided to release hard evidence of Japan's wartime atrocities to highlight its past wrongdoings. Starting on this Friday, the Chinese government will reveal confessions by Japanese war criminals every day for a total of 45 days. Be warned, there's a disturbing image at the start of this report by our Yulian.
The photo shows one of the horrific crimes by Japan's Unit 731. Wearing protective suits, 2 Japanese soldiers are seen pouring chemicals on a 5 to 6-year-old girl who is writhing in agony. This is just one of the 450 documents revealed by China's State Archives Administration on Japan's biological and chemical warfare during World War II. The fact Unit 731 used poison gas against Chinese soldiers is also described in the document. China has long accused Japan of denying its wartime wrongdoings, and in what's being seen as a timely move, China is releasing evidence of Tokyo's wartime crimes on the occasion of President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul. On top of the hard evidence, Beijing decided to release confessions of 45 Japanese war criminals, each one for 45 days, on its State Archives Administration website. The handwritten confessions include one that says Japan kidnapped 20 women from Korea and China and used them as prostitutes for Japanese troops.
These archives are hard evidence of the heinous crimes committed by Japan's imperialism against the Chinese.
An editorial from China's official news agency People's Daily added weight to the move, saying Beijing needs to open the eyes of right-wing extremists in Japan who are denying history and breaking the nation's decades-long pacifist constitution. Yurian, Arirang News.
Now, after months of government-level talks, the Abe administration is keeping its promise with North Korea and has lifted some of Japan's sanctions on the communist state. This in return for a reinvestigation into the fate of Japanese citizens abducted by the North decades ago, which will be led by North Korea's most powerful organization. Hwang Sang-hee reports.
Following a cabinet meeting Friday, Japan has formalized its decision to relax sanctions against North Korea. The sanctions were unilaterally imposed on North Korea by Japan and include travel bans to and from Pyongyang, restrictions on how much money can be sent or brought into the communist state, and port calls by North Korean ships to Japan. This after North Korea formed a special investigative team to determine the fate of several Japanese citizens abducted by the North decades ago. The committee, to be led by North Korea's most powerful National Defense Commission, will get to work starting Friday. Tokyo may further ease sanctions on Pyongyang after the first preliminary report on the investigation is released sometime between late summer and early fall. In 2002, North Korea admitted to abducting 13 Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s to help train their spies, but Japan believes even more people were kidnapped. Those observing the two neighbors' recent overtures are wary of the growing intimacy between them. In a statement Thursday, U.S. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki reiterated that Tokyo maintained transparency in its dealings with North Korea, so the denuclearization efforts of Japan and its allies, namely South Korea and the United States, remain intact. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-joo.
I'm Jin-joo.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
The Dow Jones Industrial Average smashed the 17,000 mark for the first time on Thursday, buoyed by a June jobs report that far outstripped analyst expectations. The U.S. economy added almost 300,000 new jobs, which helped drive the unemployment rate down to its lowest point in nearly 6 years. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Workers in the U.S. finally have something to celebrate. American jobs growth was stronger than expected last month. The U.S. economy added 288,000 jobs in June. That's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics on Thursday. It helped drive the unemployment rate down to 6.1% from 6.3% in May. It's the lowest rate since September 2008.
I have no doubt that relative to the first quarter, the next 3 calendar quarters, including the second quarter, will be a lot stronger, and this employment report is consistent with that view.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average topped 17,000 for the first time Thursday, and the gains were broad, confirming expectations that the U.S. economy recovered in the second quarter after a dismal start to the year. The S&P 500 climbed near the 2,000 mark. The Nasdaq closed at its highest point since the year 2000. But investors will have to wait until next week, though, to see if the gaining streak is going to continue, since there's no trading on Friday as it's Independence Day in the United States. Kim-jeon, Arirang News.
Korea's cumulative trade surplus with the U.S. reached $137 billion from year 2000 to the first quarter of this year. In a report Thursday, the U.S. Department of Commerce says apart from a deficit of $200 million in January of 2000, every quarter in the 15-year period was in the black for Korea. For the entire year of 2000, the trade surplus amounted to $11.5 billion, rose significantly by 2004, before gradually dropping in 2010 and hiking again thereafter. The surplus in the first quarter of this year stood at $2.6 billion. Economic experts attribute the ongoing surplus to the popularity of Korean automobile and IT products in the U.S., but they worry a continued trade imbalance could result in an excessive appreciation of the won against the dollar. Korea and the U.S. were the 6th largest trading partners bilaterally in 2013.
Now, the Korean shipbuilding industry has retained its #2 spot in the global shipbuilding industry, behind only China, but the margin between the two is expanding. According to UK-based Clarkson Research Services on Friday, Korea's global market share dropped to 27% from 32% in the first half of the year, while China's share was over 44%. Korea logged only 5.5 million compensated gross tons in new global ship orders in the same period. That's down nearly 30% from a year earlier. The domestic shipbuilding industry also lost ground to Japan last month. Japan had nearly 26% of new global orders in June, while Korea had just over 16%, putting it in third on the list for the month, just for that month. Industry experts say a weaker yen has contributed to the growth of the Japanese market amid a slowdown in the overall global shipbuilding industry. Now, this won't come as too much of a surprise, but wealth polarization is expected to worsen globally, and Korea is no exception. A new OECD report says the gap between the rich and the poor in Korea will be the 3rd widest of 29 member nations by the year 2060. The report says the income of the top 10% in Korea was 4.85 times higher than the bottom 10% in the year 2010, when it ranked in 4th. It says the disparity will widen over the next 50 years, with the income of the top earners to be nearly 6.5 times that of those at the bottom of the scale. Israel is expected to top the list, followed, unsurprisingly, many people would say, by the US. The OECD attributed the widening gap to highly skilled workers benefiting from technological advances. Now, 2 Coast Guard officials have been arrested on charges of failing to carry out their duties at the time of the Seoul-Ho ferry disaster. The district court in the southwestern city of Gwangju says one is a 43-year-old center leader of the Jin-joo VTS control center, and the other, a 39-year-old CCTV footage administrator. The court says the control center was unable to detect early signs of unusual activity over the waters they were monitoring on the morning of April 16th, the fateful day of the ferry sinking. The control center was also found to have fraudulently written the transcript of communications between the centre and crew members on board the Seoul ferry. The investigation is also looking into whether the centre leader ordered his subordinates to completely delete weeks of CCTV footage inside the centre that would indicate a negligence of duty. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Friday. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news centre.
Eunice, Israel is reinforcing its border with the Gaza Strip as skirmishes continue on the ground.
That's right, Jin-joo. Israel sent troops to its southern border along the Gaza Strip after some 30 rockets were fired into Israeli territory. Now, the two sides have been trading fire. The Israeli Air Force had launched some 70 airstrikes against Hamas targets in Gaza in past weeks. Israel has called its latest move defensive in nature, while Hamas told the Associated Press it wanted a truce and that it had no interest in a hostile escalation. This as street battles continue to break out in East Jerusalem, triggered by the discovery of the burned body of a Palestinian teen. Angry Palestinians hurled stones and firebombs at Israeli security forces. Tensions are feared to escalate with the funeral of 17-year-old Mohammed Abu Qudair. His body, that had been held by Israeli investigators, is said to be returned to his family on Friday. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko says he is ready to renew a ceasefire with pro-Russian separatists if it is observed by both sides. Russia's news agency RIA Novosti reports Poroshenko, in a phone call with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, outlined other conditions, including freeing all hostages and having the OSCE control battle lines in eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, the leaders of France and Germany have asked Russian President Vladimir Putin to intervene and encourage the separatists to return to talks by July 5th to define conditions for the ceasefire, according to the French presidential office. A day of rage was declared by the Muslim Brotherhood on the one-year mark since the overthrow of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. Protesters clashed with authorities and detonated bombs. Nearly 200 people were arrested by the day's end. Meanwhile, Amnesty International described Egypt's human rights situation in the past year as, quote, failing at every level. It cited at least 16,000 people who were detained to silence the opposition, many of them suffering harrowing incidents of torture and death. The Egyptian government outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood last December after its first elected leader was ousted by the military following large-scale protests. An overpass has collapsed in the World Cup host city of Belo Horizonte, falling on a busy thoroughfare below. A commuter bus, 2 construction trucks, and a small passenger car were crushed under the concrete. At least 2 people were reported killed, including a woman who was driving that commuter bus. The flyover was just 3 kilometers away from a World Cup stadium, the site of many games, including a semifinal match slated for Tuesday. Investigators have yet to determine the cause of that collapse.
Well, thank you very much, Eunice, for the international news there. Now, US President Barack Obama's personal chef, his very own chef, has come to Korea on a very special mission. He wants to learn how to cook temple fare.
Right, and his name is Sam Cass, the Senior Policy Advisor on Nutrition at the White House and an advocate of organic food, paid a visit to Jingwansa Temple in northern Seoul, where he learned the secrets behind some delicious Korean summer dishes. The Buddhist monks at the temple taught the chef how to make cucumber water kimchi, kongguksu or cold bean noodle soup, and other dishes. After the cooking class, Cass said he would prepare the healthy summer dishes he learned during his trip for President Obama, who also asked him to learn how to make bulgogi.
Good afternoon. It's going to be a rain-free day for most regions, but easterly winds will trigger sudden showers out east. So while the eastern parts of the peninsula will have somewhat cool readings, the rest of the country will see temperatures rebounding again to the 30s. I mean, we can easily tell by looking at the UV index that people in the west will be exposed to the stronger sunshine. So be sure to gear up with the sun protections. And the weather outlook for this weekend, lots of sun and hot temperatures are in store for here in the capital, but passing showers are on tap for regions down south. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. Behind, Seoul and Daegu will rise to 30 and 29, while Gwangju will hike up to 28. Now for other regions, it seems like down on Jeju and Daejeon will hike up to 25 and 30, and Dokdo should rise to 22. Well, that's all for me this week. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you very much, Jion. Enjoy your weekend as well. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time on Monday. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.